It was one of those mornings that didn't give away any signs of the chaos ahead. The sun was bright over downtown Houston, and the streets buzzed with activity as people hustled through their day. Among them was a man named Malik, a delivery driver who had seen it all. Malik wasn't flashy or loud, but there was a quiet dignity about him that spoke volumes. This particular morning, he had an important delivery to make, one that required him to head to one of the most prestigious restaurants in the city, La Belle Cuisine, known for its high-end clientele and pretentious atmosphere. It wasn't the kind of place Malik usually spent time in, but today duty called. His van rumbled into the back alley of the restaurant where deliveries were typically dropped off. The restaurant had an air of exclusivity, even in the loading area. Large steel doors with staff-only signs stood tall, almost daring anyone who didn't belong to try to enter. As he wheeled the load toward the entrance, he heard faint laughter from inside. It was the kind of laughter that made your chest tighten, a mix of ridicule and superiority. Malik shook his head lightly. He was no stranger to being underestimated or judged, but he wasn't about to let it rattle him. He knocked twice on the steel door and waited. When it opened, a young man in a pristine white chef's jacket stared at him like he was some kind of inconvenience. Behind him, two other staff members peeked out, one suppressing a laugh and the other rolling her eyes. "Deliveries are supposed to come earlier," the young man snapped, his tone dripping with annoyance. Malik calmly held up the invoice. "I'm right on schedule, sir. Fresh seafood from Gulf Coast Imports and the organic greens you requested." The chef waved him off. "Whatever. Just bring it in and don't block the kitchen entrance." As Malik pushed the dolly inside, he noticed more staff turning their heads to glance at him, their expressions ranging from amused to condescending. Someone muttered under their breath, "Guess they send just anyone to places like this." It wasn't just the words. It was the tone, the mocking, dismissive tone that said more than any insult could. Malik kept moving, unloading the boxes carefully, his hands steady even though their words lingered in the air like a bad smell. As Malik maneuvered the dolly deeper into the restaurant, he couldn't help but take in the surroundings. La Belle Cuisine was just as extravagant as the rumors had said. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a golden glow on the marble floors, so polished you could see your reflection. The open kitchen gleamed with stainless steel appliances, and every corner of the place screamed wealth. But beneath the pristine surface, there was something far less polished. Malik noticed the way the staff moved. Quick and efficient, yes, but with an air of self-importance that didn't sit right. These weren't people proud of their work. They were proud of their status, and right now Malik was at the bottom of that hierarchy. "Make sure you're not blocking the chef's station," barked a woman in a sharp black suit, not even looking up from her clipboard as she walked by. "Yes, ma'am," Malik replied, his tone polite but firm. He didn't mind following instructions, but he could feel her gaze linger on him, scrutinizing him, as if she were searching for a reason to dismiss him. Nearby, two waiters stood at the edge of the dining area, folding napkins and whispering. It didn't take a detective to figure out they were talking about him. "What do you think? 5 minutes before he messes something up?" One of them snickered. Malik ignored them and continued with his work. Years in this business had taught him that people like this weren't worth his energy. He focused on unloading the boxes neatly onto the counter by the walk-in fridge. Still, the comments kept coming. "You'd think someone delivering to a place like this would at least dress better?" Another voice chimed in. Malik glanced at his uniform. It was clean and pressed, practical for someone hauling boxes all day. But to these people, it wasn't good enough. It didn't matter. He wasn't here to impress anyone. As he finished the first load and turned to head back to the truck, he passed by a group of line cooks near the grill. They, too, paused their chatter to take a long look at him. One of them, a tall man with a smirk that practically screamed trouble, leaned over and whispered loudly enough for Malik to hear, "Bet he couldn't even afford to eat here, let alone step through the front door." The others laughed, and Malik felt his jaw tighten slightly. He had plenty of practice letting things slide, but this was starting to push his limits. Still, he kept his composure and made his way back outside for the next load. But the worst was yet to come. Inside, the mocking laughter grew louder, and Malik could feel their eyes on him like he was some kind of spectacle. Malik returned to his truck, loading the second set of boxes onto his dolly. The morning heat was creeping in, and the sweat on his brow mixed with the dust from the alley. As he pushed the dolly back toward the kitchen doors, he could still hear the faint laughter echoing from inside. They hadn't even tried to lower their voices. When he re-entered the kitchen, the head chef, a sharp-featured man named Dorian, stood by the counter inspecting the ingredients Malik had already delivered. Dorian turned his nose up slightly as he picked up a crate of seafood. "Is this the best they could send?" he muttered just loud enough for Malik to hear. Malik paused for a moment. "If there's an issue with the quality, I can call the supplier," he said calmly. Dorian waved him off with a dismissive gesture. No, just drop it off and leave. We've got more important things to focus on." As Malik began unloading the second batch of boxes, he couldn't help but notice the way Dorian carried himself. The chef spoke loudly, directing his staff with exaggerated authority as if he needed everyone to know he was in charge. "I swear the standards are dropping everywhere. Look at this guy. Do they not teach professionalism to delivery drivers anymore?" Dorian muttered as he turned to one of the servers. The server, a young woman with a forced smile, glanced at Malik but didn't say anything. Instead, she nodded at Dorian and busied herself setting up the dining area. Malik kept his head down and finished unloading. He wasn't about to let their words get to him, but he couldn't ignore the growing irritation. It wasn't just the comments. It was the blatant lack of respect, the assumption that he was less than simply because of his job. As he moved to stack the empty crates, one of the kitchen staff called out to him, "Hey, delivery guy, you missed a box." Malik was confused because he was sure he hadn't. The staff member pointed to a crate sitting near the door. As he bent down to pick it up, he realized it was empty. Another round of laughter rippled through the kitchen. "Just messing with you, man," the guy said, slapping his knee. "Relax a little." Malik didn't respond. Instead, he placed the empty crate back down and finished his work without another word. His patience was wearing thin, but he reminded himself of why he was here. He had a job to do and a point to make, even if they didn't know it yet. When the delivery was finally complete, Malik handed the signed invoice to Dorian. The chef didn't even look at him as he scrolled his signature across the paper. "You can go now," Dorian said curtly, not bothering with a thank you. Malik paused for a moment, his eyes steady. "Have a good day," he said evenly, before turning and heading back to his truck. But just as he reached the door, one of the waiters muttered under his breath, "Yeah, go back to wherever you came from." That was it. Malik stopped in his tracks, his hand resting on the door handle for a brief moment. The room fell silent. All eyes were on him. Malik turned slowly, his gaze meeting the waiter's. There was no anger in his expression, just a calm confidence that immediately silenced the smirks and whispers. "I came here," Malik said, his voice steady, "to deliver something you clearly need more of. Respect." The room stayed quiet as Malik walked out, but the real surprise was still waiting. It was only a matter of time before they realized who he really was. Malik leaned against the side of his truck, taking a moment to catch his breath. The delivery was done, but the weight of the morning lingered. He'd been in similar situations countless times before, but something about today felt different. Maybe it was the way they all seemed so comfortable in their assumptions, so blind to the possibility that he was more than what they saw. He glanced at the restaurant's grand facade, the name La Ciel etched in elegant gold letters above the entrance. It was surreal, really. Just a few weeks ago, he had signed the final papers that made him the owner of this place, a bold step in his growing empire of fine dining establishments. But Malik's journey to this moment wasn't one of privilege or shortcuts. It was built on years of sweat, sacrifice, and a relentless drive to prove himself. He grew up in a small town in Louisiana where opportunities were scarce and expectations for someone like him were even scarcer. His parents worked tirelessly, instilling in him the value of hard work and integrity. Malik had started as a dishwasher in a local diner when he was just 16. Back then, he'd watched the cooks and servers with fascination, dreaming of the day he could create something bigger, something extraordinary. Over the years, he climbed the ladder, moving from kitchen staff to manager. Eventually, he saved enough to open his first restaurant. It wasn't flashy, but it was his, And from there, his vision only grew. When the opportunity to buy LaSalle came up, Malik didn't hesitate. He knew it was a risk, but he also knew what this place could become under his leadership. The restaurant had a reputation for exclusivity, but Malik saw potential beyond the surface. He wanted to turn it into something more, a place where everyone felt valued, from the guests to the staff to the people making deliveries. But the transition wouldn't be easy. Malik had chosen not to announce his ownership immediately, opting instead to observe the culture firsthand. He wanted to see how the staff operated when they thought no one was watching. What he saw that morning only confirmed what he suspected. Change was long overdue. Malik climbed back into his truck and made a few notes on his tablet, preparing for the meeting he had scheduled with the staff later that afternoon. He had kept the announcement of his arrival vague, telling the manager to gather everyone in the dining room at 3 p.m. He thought about Dorian, the way he carried himself, how quick he was to judge and dismiss. He thought about the servers, the kitchen staff, and the manager, who barely acknowledged him. Malik didn't feel anger toward them. He felt something deeper, a sense of disappointment in how easily people fell into patterns of prejudice and disrespect. By the time he drove away from the restaurant, Malik had made up his mind. The meeting wouldn't just be about an introduction, it would be about setting the tone for what LaSalle would stand for moving forward. Respect, humility, and equality weren't just buzzwords to him. They were the foundation of everything he believed in. At 3 p.m. sharp, the staff began to gather in the main dining room of LaSalle. Some looked curious, others annoyed. Dorian leaned against a table, arms crossed, his expression a mixture of irritation and boredom. "What's this about?" he muttered to one of the servers. "We're slammed tonight, and now we have to sit through a meeting?" The restaurant manager, Greg, a middle-aged man with a nervous air, stood near the entrance, looking unusually uneasy. He had been told to assemble everyone, but even he didn't know exactly why. All he had been told was that the new owner would be arriving today, and this meeting was mandatory. As the staff settled in, the doors to the dining room opened, and in walked Malik, still dressed in the same uniform he had worn that morning. For a moment the room was silent, the staff exchanging confused glances. Dorian let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered under his breath. Malik walked to the center of the room, his calm demeanor unchanged. He could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken questions hanging, but he didn't rush to explain. Instead, he let the silence linger for a few moments, meeting their gazes one by one. Finally, Greg cleared his throat, breaking the awkward quiet. Malik, what are you doing here? This meeting is for staff only." Malik smiled faintly, his voice steady but firm. "I know, Greg. That's why I'm here." Dorian rolled his eyes. "Look, if this is about the delivery earlier, can we just move on? We have actual work to do." Malik turned his attention to Dorian, his gaze steady. "You're right, Chef Dorian. This is about the delivery, and it's about a lot more than that." Dorian raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback. Before he could respond, Malik continued. "Let me introduce myself properly. My name is Malik Reynolds, and as of 3 weeks ago, I'm the new owner of LaSalle Fine Dining." The room fell silent once again, but this time, the silence was thick with disbelief. Dorian's smirk faded, replaced by wide-eyed shock. The servers exchanged stunned glances, and Greg's face turned pale. "You?" Dorian finally managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. "You're the owner?" "That's right," Malik said, his voice even. "And before you say anything else, I want you to understand something. This isn't about me flaunting my title or putting anyone in their place. This is about respect." He paused for a moment, allowing his words to sink in. "I spent the morning observing how this team operates. I saw the way you treated me because you assumed I was just a delivery driver, and I want you to think about what that says. About you, not about me." Dorian opened his mouth to respond but quickly shut it again. The servers, who had been smirking only moments before, now looked down at the floor, suddenly finding the pattern on their shoes fascinating. Malik's voice carried a quiet strength as he continued. "You judged me before you even knew who I was. You made assumptions based on how I looked, what I was wearing, and the job I was doing. And that behavior, it doesn't just hurt me, It hurts this restaurant. It hurts the culture we're trying to build here. The room remained silent as Malik's words lingered in the air. He met their eyes one by one, allowing his message to sink in. Every person who walks through these doors deserves respect, whether they're a guest, a staff member, or someone delivering the ingredients that keep this place running. That's the standard I expect from every single one of you. For the first time that day, Malik saw something new in their expressions. Shame. As uncomfortable as it was for them, it was exactly what they needed to feel. The silence in the room was almost palpable. Every staff member seemed to be grappling with the weight of Malik's words. Dorian shifted uncomfortably, his arms no longer crossed in defiance, but hanging loosely by his sides. The servers avoided eye contact, their earlier smirks now gone. Malik took a step forward, his tone softening but still full of authority. I know change doesn't happen overnight, but if this restaurant is going to succeed, it starts with how we treat each other. It starts with accountability and respect for everyone. He paused, scanning the room to make sure his message landed. I didn't start at the top, he continued. I've been where you are, working long hours, doing the jobs no one notices. I've scrubbed floors, washed dishes, carried boxes, just like I did this morning. And let me tell you, those roles are just as important as any chef or manager in this room. Without them, this place doesn't run.